Did you know that Christmas used to last for 12 full days of chaos? Or that people once chose a peasant to be their king for the holidays? Our modern holidays can feel a little predictable. We have the tree, the presents, the quiet family dinner. But something is missing. We've traded wild, community wide celebrations for something smaller, quieter, and maybe a little less alive. Hundreds of years ago, the winter holidays were not just a day or two off work. They were a season of misrule, or a time when the world turned upside down. The poor feasted like lords. The rich were targets of pranks. People sang to apple trees to make them grow and wore animal masks to go door to door. It was loud, messy, and deeply connected to the seasons and the community. There was a necessary release after a year of hard labor. But what have we lost by taming our holidays? Have we sanitized them so much that we've scrubbed away the meaning? These aren't just quaint historical footnotes. They were traditions that served a purpose. They bound communities together, eased social tensions, and reminded people that even in the darkest part of winter, life and laughter would return. Let's look at some of these forgotten rituals. Maybe we'll find something worth bringing back. Number 17, what if a peasant ruled Christmas? Imagine your town's Christmas celebration. Now imagine it's being run by a random person chosen from the crowd. This person is now in charge. They command the mayor, the police chief, the wealthiest person in town. For the next few weeks, their word is law. This wasn't a fantasy. This was the Lord of Misrule. This tradition was one of the most beloved parts of the 12 days of Christmas, a period stretching from Christmas Day to Twelfth Night on January 5th. It was most popular in England from the 14th to the 17th centuries. The idea was simple. A commoner, often a peasant or a lower-ranking servant in a noble household, was appointed the Lord of Misrule. Sometimes they were chosen by drawing a bean from a cake, other times they were simply elected. Once chosen, this temporary king was given a mock court, complete with jesters and followers. His job was to preside over the season's feasting, drinking, and revelry. He was the master of the party. His reign was one of pure chaos. He would lead raucous parades through the streets. He would demand food and drink from the wealthy. He might hold a fake church service where prayers were sung backward. The normal rules of society were suspended. The Lord of Misrule's entire purpose was to turn the world on its head. Servants got to order their masters around. The poor were treated like royalty. It was a massive community-wide role reversal. Historians like Ronald Hutton, in his book The Stations of the Sun, explained that this wasn't just mindless fun. It was a social safety valve. Medieval life was brutally hierarchical. Most people had no power and no voice. The Lord of Misrule gave them a brief, controlled outlet for their frustrations. For a few days, they could mock the powerful without fear of punishment. It was a way to let off steam so the whole system didn't explode. The church and state actually encouraged it for a long time, seeing it as a way to keep the peace. Of course, not everyone loved it. The Puritans, who gained power in England in the 17th century, absolutely hated the Lord of Misrule. A writer named Philip Stubbs, in his 1583 book, The Anatomy of Abuses, called the Lord of Misrule a grand captain of all mischief. He saw these traditions as pagan, sinful, and a direct threat to a good Christian society. He and others like him successfully campaigned to have these practices banned. By the time the Puritans outlawed Christmas entirely in 1647, the Lord of Misrule was already fading away. Reviving, this isn't about causing riots, it's about remembering the value of flipping the script. What if, for one day, the family's youngest child made all the decisions? What if, at the office holiday party, the intern was put in charge instead of the CEO? Challenge our assumptions about who holds power and why. It reminds us that our rigid social structures are, in the end, just man-made rules. And sometimes, it's healthy to break them, but there are things we still don't know. How many lords of misrule took their power too seriously and refused to give it up when the holiday was over? What happened to them? Were there secret codes and messages passed during these chaotic festivals, planning for real rebellions? Did any real lord or bishop ever get permanently humiliated by a prank that went too far? What unspoken truths about the community were revealed when the powerful were forced into silence? Number 16, could singing to trees actually make a difference? It's a cold January night. The sun is set. You and your neighbors gather in an apple orchard. You're carrying shotguns, pots, pans, and a giant bowl of spiced cider. You pick the oldest, most respected tree in the orchard. You gather around it, you start singing to it, you bang the pots and pans to scare away evil spirits. You fire the shotguns into its upper branches. You pour cider onto its roots as an offering. Then you place a piece of cider-soaked toast in its branches for the robins, the good spirits of the tree. This is wassailing. Wassailing has ancient roots, coming from the Anglo-Saxon phrase wassail, which means be well or be healthy. It was a folk ritual practiced all over England, especially in cider-producing regions like Somerset and Herefordshire. It took place around Twelfth Night, marking the end of the Christmas season. The goal was simple and practical to ensure a good apple harvest in the coming year. People genuinely believed that by performing this ceremony, they were waking up the trees from their winter sleep and protecting them from any malevolent forces that might cause blight or a poor crop. There were two kinds of wassailing. The one in the orchard was about the trees. The other kind involved going from house to house, singing and offering a drink from the wassail bowl in exchange for gifts or money. This is a direct ancestor of our modern Christmas caroling. The wassail bowl itself was a key part of the tradition. It was a huge bowl, often made of wood, filled with a warm, spiced punch. The most common recipe was mulled ale, cider, or wine, mixed with sugar, cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, and topped with roasted apples. The name of this drink was lamb's wool. The practice seems strange to us now. We rely on science, fertilizer, and pesticides for our crops. But for medieval people, the world was a much more mysterious place. Spirits, both good and bad, were everywhere. The health of their crops was a matter of life and death. Wassailing was a way of taking some control. It was a community effort to ask for nature's blessing. The folklorists Iona and Peter Opie, in their book The Lore and Language of Schoolchildren, show how many of these seemingly strange rituals are about creating a sense of order and hope in an uncertain world. The tradition faded with the rise of industrial agriculture. Why sing to a tree when you can just spray it with chemicals? But it never completely died out. In some parts of England, wassailing ceremonies are being revived. People are rediscovering the joy of gathering outdoors in the winter, of connecting with their food sources, and of participating in a tradition that is thousands of years old. It reminds us that our relationship with nature isn't just about taking, it's also about giving back, even if it's just a song and a sip of cider. It's about showing respect. But what don't we know? Was there a specific song or chant that was thought to be the most powerful for waking the trees? Did different types of trees, like pears or cherries, require a different kind of wassailing ceremony? If a village performed a wassail and the harvest was still bad, who or what did they blame? Was there a bad wassail that could actually curse an orchard instead of blessing it? Number 15, why was bringing a log inside such a big deal? Today, if you hear the term Yule log, you probably think of a chocolate cake shaped like a log. But for centuries, the Yule log was an actual massive piece of wood, and the ceremony surrounding it was one of the most important parts of the Christmas celebration. You know, it wasn't just about having a fire, it was a ritual that connected the family to the health and prosperity of the home for the entire year. The tradition was common across Europe, especially in England, France, and the Germanic countries. The process began on Christmas Eve. The man of the house, along with his sons, would go out into the woods to find a suitable log, or, in some cases, an entire tree trunk. It had to be huge, big enough to burn continuously through the 12 days of Christmas. The type of wood was important. Ash was often preferred. Once selected, the log was decorated with ribbons and greenery. Then it was ceremoniously dragged back to the house. Getting it into the house was a major event. The whole family would have to help push and pull this enormous piece of wood through the door and onto the hearth. This act symbolized bringing the light and life of the forest into the home during the darkest time of year. Before it was lit, it was often blessed. People would pour wine or salt over it. The fire was lit using a splinter from the previous year's Yule log, which had been saved all year for this exact purpose. This created a continuous chain linking one year's fortune to the next. While the log burned, it was the center of the household. It provided warmth and light for all the holiday feasting and games. But it was also a source of magic. According to folklore historian Christina Hole's work, A Dictionary of British Folklore, the ashes from the Yule log were believed to have protective powers. They would be scattered on the fields to ensure fertility. A small piece of the charcoal might be placed in a well to keep the water pure. It was also believed that as long as the Yule log was burning, the house was protected from evil spirits and even lightning. Letting the fire go out before the 12 days were over was considered a very bad omen. The decline of the Yule log tradition was a practical one. As home design changed, the massive open hearths needed to accommodate such a log disappeared. They were replaced by smaller, more efficient fireplaces and eventually central heating. There was simply no place for a log the size of a small tree. The tradition survived only in its symbolic, edible form. Bringing this back isn't about ripping out our modern heating systems. It's about creating a central point for our holiday gatherings. Maybe it's not a log, but a special set of candles that you light every night, or a bonfire in the backyard on a specific day. The idea is to create a ritual of light and warmth that connects one year to the next. It's about saving a small piece of this year's celebration to kindle the next one, a physical reminder of continuity and hope. But the history is murky. What was the absolute original Yule log ceremony like before it was absorbed into Christmas? Was it part of a Norse pagan ritual to honor the god Thor? When a family's Yule log went out by accident, what specific rituals did they perform to ward off the bad luck they believed was coming? And what did people do if the splinter from last year's log was lost or destroyed? Was there a backup plan for keeping the luck of the house alive? Number 14, what did a pig's head have to do with Christmas? A huge feast is laid out on the table, but the centerpiece isn't a turkey or a ham. It's the head of a wild boar, roasted and decorated with a shiny red apple stuffed in its mouth. As it's carried into the hall, everyone stands up and sings a special song, the Boar's Head Carol. This was the pinnacle of the medieval Christmas feast. The boar's head tradition was especially popular in the great halls of nobles, universities, and wealthy manors in England. It was a symbol of wealth, status, and courage. Wild boars were incredibly dangerous animals to hunt. They were fierce, powerful, and known to kill hunters. To successfully hunt a boar and bring its head to the table was the ultimate display of man's triumph over the wildness of nature. Serving it at the Christmas feast was a way of showing that the household was prosperous and protected. The ceremony was elaborate. The head would be prepared by the kitchen staff, often seasoned with spices and herbs. It was then brought into the dining hall on a large, ornate platter, sometimes made of gold or silver. It was a moment of high drama. A procession would be led by the chief server or a group of singers. The famous carol, which dates back to at least the 15th century and is still sung today at Queen's College, Oxford, tells the story. The lyrics celebrate the beast, its capture, and the joy of the feast to come. The first verse goes, "The boar's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary, and I pray you, my masters, be merry, so many as be at this feast." The origins of this are likely pre-Christian. The boar was a sacred animal in many pagan cultures. For the Norse, it was associated with the god Freyr, a deity of fertility and harvest. Sacrificing a boar was a key part of their Yule celebrations, meant to ensure a prosperous year ahead. As Christianity spread, it didn't stamp out these old traditions, it absorbed them. The pagan sacrifice was transformed into the Christian feast's centerpiece, as described by historian Clement Amiles in his book Christmas in Ritual and Tradition, Christian and Pagan. The boar became a symbol of Christ's triumph over sin. Why did this tradition fade? For one, wild boars were hunted to extinction in Britain by the 17th century. It became impossible to get the main ingredient. People started substituting a regular pig's head, but it didn't have the same symbolic power. Also, as society changed, the grand communal feasts in great halls became less common. The Christmas celebration moved from the public hall to the private family dining room, and a massive, intimidating boar's head didn't quite fit the new, cozier atmosphere. Reviving the boar's head feast isn't about going out to hunt dangerous animals. It's about having a show-stopping centerpiece at your meal. It's about making the presentation of the food a moment of celebration and drama. Maybe it's a beautifully decorated cake or an elaborate dish that takes a group effort to bring to the table. The point is to create a moment of shared awe and appreciation for the food and the people who prepared it, turning the meal itself into a form of entertainment. But questions remain. What were the specific decorations on the boar's head meant to symbolize? Did different herbs represent different wishes for the household in the new year? We know the carol from Oxford, but were there other regional boar's head carols that have been lost to time? And in households that couldn't afford a boar, what animal did they use as a poverty boar? And did it have its own special ceremony? What was the one part of the boar's head that the lord of the manor always claimed for himself? Number 13, why did people wear animal masks and cross-dress at Christmas? Imagine a knock at your door on a dark winter night. You open it to find a group of figures standing on your doorstep. They aren't carolers. They are silent. They are wearing masks, some shaped like animal heads. Some of the men are dressed as women and some of the women as men. They don't speak, but they enter your house through gestures. They might perform a small, strange play or a dance. You are expected to give them food and drink. After they receive their payment, they leave as silently as they came. These were the mummers. Mumming, or guising, was a widespread European tradition during the 12 days of Christmas. The word mumming comes from an old German word meaning masked or disguised. It was a form of folk theater and social ritual. Small groups of people, usually young men from the village, would disguise themselves with masks, costumes, and sometimes by blackening their faces with soot. The key was to be completely unrecognizable. The performances they put on were often simple, traditional plays. The most common was the St. George and the Dragon play, a story of death and resurrection. In the play, a hero, St. George, fights a villain, the Turkish knight, or a dragon. The hero is killed, but then a comical doctor character comes in and brings him back to life with a magic potion. This theme of resurrection was deeply tied to the time of year. It was a symbolic drama about the death of the old year and the rebirth of the new, the triumph of life over the darkness of winter. But there was another, more chaotic side to mumming. As described by the churchman Alcuin of York as early as the 8th century, these disguised visitors could also be a source of trouble. Because they were anonymous, they could, get away with things they normally wouldn't. They might play pranks, steal food, or harass people they had a grudge against. The cross-dressing and animal masks were particularly offensive to church authorities, who saw them as pagan and immoral. Numerous church councils throughout the Middle Ages tried to ban mumming, but the tradition was too popular to be stopped. King Henry VIII himself was said to be a fan of mumming, though he passed a law in 1511 making it illegal to go mumming while wearing a mask, for fear that it could be used as a cover for criminal activity. The tradition eventually evolved. These scary, silent mummers became the more familiar Christmas carolers and trick-or-treaters of Halloween. The element of disguise and visiting houses for a reward remained, but the sinister edge was lost. Today, mumming plays are still performed in some villages in England, but they are a self-conscious folk revival, not a spontaneous community ritual. To bring it back, we could embrace the idea of anonymous, playful mischief. Instead of just sending a Christmas card, what if you left a mysterious small gift on a neighbor's porch? Or organized a neighborhood talent show where everyone performs in costume? It's about shaking up social norms and introducing an element of mystery and surprise into our overly planned holiday season. It's about the freedom that comes from putting on a mask, even for just a little while. But the origins are mysterious. Were the animal masks meant to represent ancient pagan gods, or were they just a convenient disguise? What was the original mummers play about before it became the story of St. George? Did the mummers have a secret language of gestures that they used to communicate with each other in the households they visited? And how many crimes were committed under the cloak of a mummer's disguise that were never solved? Number 12. How could a cake predict your future? On the last of the 12 days of Christmas, January 6th, the family would gather for a special celebration. The main event was a cake. It was a rich, fruit-filled cake, known as the 12th night cake. But this was no ordinary dessert. Hidden inside its batter before baking were two small objects, a dried bean and a dried pea. The person who found the bean in their slice was crowned king of the feast. The person who found the pea was crowned the queen. This tradition of the being king was celebrated all over Europe. The cake was ceremoniously cut and distributed to every member of the household, from the lord and lady down to the lowest kitchen servant. Everyone got a piece. Once the king and queen were discovered, they were treated like royalty for the rest of the night. Everyone had to do what they said. It was another version of the Lord of Misrule, a temporary role reversal that brought the Christmas season of Misrule to a close. The diary of Samuel Pepys, a famous 17th century English administrator, gives us a great first-hand account of a 12th night party. On January 6, 1669, he wrote about the fun of choosing the king and queen and the games that followed. The night was filled with feasting, drinking, and playing pranks. The mock royalty would lead the celebrations, and their reign would end at midnight, at which point the social order returned to normal and the festive season was officially over. The origins are thought to go all the way back to the Roman festival of Saturnalia. During Saturnalia, a mock king was also chosen, often by casting lots, to preside over the festivities. The bean was a common object used for this kind of selection in the ancient world. The church later adopted the festival as the Feast of the Epiphany, celebrating the visit of the three kings, the Magi, to the baby Jesus. The cake became known as a king cake, and the bean finder was said to be honored in the same way the Magi honored Jesus. This tradition is still very much alive in some places, like New Orleans during Mardi Gras, where a plastic baby is hidden in the king cake. The tradition began to die out in the 19th century, particularly in England, though Queen Victoria is said to have disliked the rowdy, boisterous nature of Twelfth Night parties. As her more sober, family-focused vision of Christmas became the standard, the chaotic final night of the season fell out of fashion. The Christmas tree, introduced to England by Victoria's husband Prince Albert, replaced the Twelfth Night cake as the main symbol of the holiday. Reviving this is simple and fun. Bake a cake. Hide a bean in it. A whole almond works well. Whoever finds it gets to be king or queen for the night. They get to choose the movie or the music, or they are exempt from doing the dishes. It's a small, playful way to end the holiday season with a bit of ceremony and a final burst of fun. But it's a game that puts everyone in the household on an equal footing, even if just for one evening. But we still have questions. What happened if someone accidentally swallowed the bean or the pea? Was it considered a bad omen? Were there other objects hidden in the cake besides the bean and the pea with different meanings? In a poor family that couldn't afford a fancy cake, what did they use instead to choose their king and queen? And what was the most outrageous command a bean king ever gave that the rest of the household was forced to obey? Or number 11, when was a child the most powerful person in the church? Imagine walking into a great cathedral on a holy day in December. You expect to see the bishop in his tall mitre and elaborate robes leading the service. But instead, sitting on the bishop's throne is a young boy, maybe 10 years old. He is dressed in miniature versions of the bishop's vestments. He is the one giving the sermon. The adult clergy are all taking orders from him. This was the strange and wonderful tradition of the boy bishop. This practice was common across Europe from at least the 10th century. It usually took place on December 6th, St. Nicholas's Day, the patron saint of children, or on December 28th, Holy Innocents' Day, which commemorates the children killed by King Herod. On that day, a boy, usually a choir boy from the cathedral, was elected by his peers to be the boy bishop. He would hold this office until the end of the day, or sometimes for a few days. His authority was real, at least within the confines of the church. He and his clergy of other children would take over the running of the cathedral. They would lead the processionals, sing the chants, and the boy bishop himself would deliver a sermon. While he couldn't celebrate Mass, he performed every other function of a real bishop. The adult clergy, including the actual bishop, had to step aside and act as his assistants. In some towns, the boy bishop and his followers would even parade through the streets, collecting money and offering blessings to the people. This was yet another example of the medieval love for role reversal during the Christmas season. It was part of the same world turned upside down impulse that gave us the Lord of Misrule. Historians like E.K. Chambers, in his book The Medieval Stage, argue that it was a way of honoring both childhood and the idea of humility. It was a living lesson from the Bible: the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. It reminded the powerful church leaders that their authority was temporary, and that in the eyes of God, a child was just as important as a bishop. The sermons delivered by the boy bishops were often written for them by the adult clergy. Some of these sermons have survived. They are usually quite serious, urging people to live a better life. But you can imagine there was also a lot of fun involved. It was a chance for the choir boys, who lived a very strict and disciplined life, to have some power and be the center of attention. The tradition was a target for reformers. It was seen as a mockery of the church and its holy rituals. King Henry VIII of England banned the practice in 1541, seeing it as a childish superstition. Although his daughter, Queen Mary, I briefly revived it, it was permanently abolished by Queen Elizabeth I. The Protestant Reformation, with its emphasis on sober and serious worship, had no place for such theatrical and chaotic traditions. Reviving the boy bishop isn't about mocking religion. It's about giving children a real voice and real responsibility. What if, for one day, a school was run by a student council? What if a community meeting was chaired by a teenager? It's about listening to the perspectives of the young and reminding ourselves that wisdom doesn't only come with age. It's a way to practice humility and see our world through fresh eyes, but so much is unknown. What was the election process for the boy bishop like among the choir boys? Was it a serious political campaign or just a game? Did a boy bishop ever get into real trouble for a sermon that was too critical of the adult clergy? What was the biggest and most lavish procession a boy bishop ever led? And did any of these boys, having tasted power at such a young age, go on to become actual, powerful bishops later in life? Number 10. Did people give gifts on the right day? If you ask someone today when they exchange Christmas gifts, they would say December 25th. It seems obvious, but for much of history, that wasn't the main day for giving presents. For centuries, the most important day for gift giving during the winter season was New Year's Day. In the Roman Empire, the New Year's celebration was called Calends. It was a time for exchanging good luck gifts called strinae. These were usually simple things like coins, honey, or branches from a sacred grove, meant to wish the recipient a sweet and prosperous year. As the Roman Empire became Christian, the church tried to stamp out this pagan gift-giving tradition. They wanted the focus to be on the birth of Christ on December 25th, a day for solemn worship, not for exchanging presents. But the tradition was too strong. People kept giving gifts on January 1st. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the Tudor and Stuart periods in England, New Year's Day remained the primary day for it. This was especially true for the upper classes. The monarch would hold a great court where they would receive gifts from all their nobles. This wasn't just a friendly exchange, it was a political necessity. The value of the gift a noble gave to the king or queen was a direct reflection of their loyalty and status. We have detailed records from the court of Queen Elizabeth I, listing every single New Year's gift she received, from jewels and gold coins to elaborate gowns, and even, in one case, a pair of black silk stockings. For common people, the gifts were more modest. Landlords might give their tenants food or drink. People would exchange small tokens of good luck. Christmas Day itself was a more religious affair, centered on a big feast. The idea of giving presents specifically to children on Christmas Day was linked to the story of Saint Nicholas, whose feast day was December 6th. But the large-scale exchange of gifts among adults was a New Year's affair. So what changed? According to the historian Stephen Nissenbaum in his book, The Battle for Christmas, the shift happened in the 19th century. The Victorians in both England and America are largely responsible for creating the version of Christmas we celebrate today. They wanted to transform Christmas from a rowdy public festival into a quiet, family-centered holiday. They popularized the Christmas tree, Christmas cards, and the idea of Santa Claus bringing gifts for children. In this new model, the focus of gift-giving shifted firmly to Christmas morning, centered around the family and the tree. New Year's Day became a quieter day of reflection and making resolutions. Reviving New Year's gift-giving could actually take some of the pressure off Christmas. It would separate the religious and family aspects of Christmas Day from the commercial frenzy of present swapping. It would also return the tradition to its original meaning, a gift to wish someone good fortune for the year to come, not just a reward for being good. It could be a day to give small, thoughtful gifts to a wider circle of friends and neighbors, strengthening community bonds for the new year. But we can only speculate about some things. When a noble gave the king a disappointing New Year's gift, what were the real political consequences? Among poor villagers, what was the most common or treasured New Year's gift to exchange? Was there a specific type of gift that was considered bad luck to give or receive on New Year's Day? And how did the tradition of the Christmas box given to servants on St. Stephen's Day, December 26, fit in with the larger gift-giving calendar? Number 9. What did a dead bird have to do with a saint? On the day after Christmas, December 26th, groups of boys and men would go out into the countryside. Their mission was to hunt a tiny bird, the wren. Once they had captured and killed one, they would fasten it to the top of a long pole, which they would decorate with ribbons and holly. Then they would carry this pole from house to house, singing a song and asking for money. This was the strange tradition of hunting the wren, and the day was known as Wren Day. This custom was especially popular in Ireland, the Isle of Man, and parts of England and Wales. It was practiced for centuries and survived in some rural areas well into the 20th century. The song they sang, known as the Wren Song, explained their purpose. One version starts, the wren, the king of all birds. St. Stephen's Day was caught in the furs. Although he is little, his family is great. I pray you, good landlady, give us a treat. Is the treat they were asking for was usually money, food, or drink. If a household was generous, the wren boys would give them a feather from the bird for good luck. If a household refused, they might be cursed with bad fortune. But why the wren? Why this tiny, seemingly insignificant bird? There are several legends that try to explain it. In Christian folklore, the story goes that when the first Christian martyr, Saint Stephen, whose feast day is December 26, was trying to hide from his enemies, a wren made a noise and gave away his location, leading to his capture and death. Hunting. The wren was therefore a form of symbolic revenge. Another story connects the wren to Irish soldiers fighting the Norse. The Irish were about to launch a surprise attack when a wren, pecking at crumbs on a soldier's drum, woke up the sleeping Norsemen. The attack failed and the wren was branded a traitor. However, historians and folklorists believe the tradition is much older and has pre-Christian pagan roots. In Celtic mythology, the wren was a highly respected and powerful bird, sometimes considered the king of the birds. The folklorist Sir James Frazer, in his seminal work The Golden Bough, links the ritual to ancient practices of sacrificing a sacred animal or king at the end of the year to ensure the return of life and fertility in the spring. The wren was the symbolic king who had to die for the community to be reborn. The ritual was a serious, symbolic act, not just a cruel prank. The practice faded because of changing attitudes towards animals and a general decline in rural folk traditions. People became uncomfortable with the idea of killing a bird for a festive ritual. The tradition was tamed in some modern revivals. A fake wren is used instead of a real one. We shouldn't revive the part about killing a bird, but the core idea of a community walk on the day after Christmas has value. After the intensity and enclosure of Christmas Day, a tradition that gets everyone out of the house and walking through the neighborhood together is a healthy thing. It could be a neighborhood scavenger hunt or a walk to deliver small treats to neighbors. It's about stretching your legs, getting fresh air, and turning the focus from the immediate family back out to the wider community. But the true origin is still a mystery. Was the wren a substitute for an earlier, more significant sacrifice, perhaps even a human one, in deep antiquity? Were there different rituals for the wren's burial after the parade was over, and what did they signify? Did the specific way the wren was killed hold any symbolic meaning? And in the mythology, if the wren was the king of the birds, what crime did it commit to deserve being hunted down by its subjects every year? Number 8, why did the holiday season end with a woman holding a candle? Our modern Christmas season seems to end abruptly. On December 26th, the decorations are already on sale. By New Year's Day, many people have taken down their trees. But in medieval times, the Christmas season had a clear and beautiful endpoint February 2nd, a festival called Candlemas. Candlemas was a major Christian feast day. Its official name is the Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It falls 40 days after Christmas, which, according to Jewish law, was the day a mother would be purified after giving birth and could present her child at the temple. So the day commemorates Mary bringing the baby Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem. It was also known as the Feast of the Presentation of Christ. The popular name Candlemas came from the central ritual of the day. The congregation would gather at the church, and everyone would be given a candle. The priest would bless the candles, and then the entire group would walk in a grand procession holding their lit candles. This symbolized Jesus being the light of the world. After the ceremony, people would take their blessed candles home. These weren't just ordinary candles, they were believed to have special protective powers. According to folk belief, a lit Candlemas candle could ward off evil spirits, protect a house from storms and lightning, and provide comfort to the sick and dying. For most people, Candlemas was the official end of the Christmas season. It was the day you were supposed to take down all your Christmas decorations, like the holly and ivy. There was an old superstition that if you left your decorations up after Candlemas, you were inviting goblins to live in your house. An old English poem says, "Down with the rosemary," and so down with the bays and mistletoe, down with the holly, ivy all, wherewith ye dressed the Christmas hall. The festival also had deep roots in the agricultural year. It was a cross-quarter day, marking the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. It was seen as the first hint of spring. There were many weather-related proverbs associated with the day. The most famous one is still with us in a slightly different form. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another flight. If Candlemas Day be clouds and rain, winter is gone and will not come again. This is the direct ancestor of the American tradition of Groundhog Day. Candlemas lost its importance after the Protestant Reformation in England, which did away with most of the saints' days, processions, and elaborate rituals. The Christmas season was shortened, eventually shrinking to the 12 days, and then, for many, to just Christmas Day itself. We lost that long, slow transition out of winter. Reviving Candlemas gives our holiday season a better conclusion. Instead of a sudden stop, it offers a gradual winding down. It's a day to pack away the decorations with a sense of ceremony. You could have a special family dinner or light candles all around the house as a final farewell to the darkness of midwinter. It's a moment to look back at the holiday season that has passed and to look forward to the coming spring. It provides a sense of closure. But its history has gaps. What was the pagan festival that Candlemas replaced? Many historians believe it was related to the Roman festival of Lupercalia or the Celtic festival of Imbolc, but the exact connection is unclear. What was the secret to making a Candlemas candle that was believed to be more powerful than others? Was it the type of wax or the prayers said during its making? What happened to a person who was caught leaving their Christmas decorations up after the deadline? Was there a specific punishment ritual performed by the community? Number 7, was there a holiday for donkeys? In the middle of January, the people of a French town would lead a donkey into their main church. The donkey would be draped in a beautiful golden cloth. A young girl, holding a baby, would be riding on its back. They would lead the donkey all the way up to the altar. The priest would then begin the church service. But at the end of every prayer, instead of saying Amen, the entire congregation would bray like a donkey, hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. This was the Feast of the Ass. This festival, celebrated on January 14th, was particularly popular in France during the 12th and 13th centuries. It was meant to commemorate the flight of the Holy Family into Egypt to escape King Herod. The donkey was the guest of honor because it was the animal that carried the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus to safety. The festival was a mix of serious religious observance and chaotic folk celebration. The ceremony was recorded in a medieval manuscript called the Office of the Ass from Beauvais. This document lays out the whole service. It includes a special hymn sung in the donkey's honor called the Song of the Ass. The lyrics praise the animal for its strength and its role in biblical history, not just in the flight to Egypt, but also for carrying Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. The song's chorus, sung in Latin, translates to, "Hail, Sir Donkey, hail." This was another one of these fools, a group of holidays around Christmas and New Year's that involved parody and misrule. Bringing a live animal to the altar and braying during a sacred service was a deliberate act of fun and irreverence. It was a way for common people to feel that the church wasn't always a stern, remote institution. It could be a place of laughter and joy, too. The donkey, a humble, everyday beast of burden, was elevated to a place of honor. It was a celebration of the lowly and the overlooked. As you might expect, church authorities were not always pleased. Over time, high-ranking clergy began to see the Feast of the Ass as blasphemous and undignified. They felt it made a mockery of the sacred liturgy. A letter from the Faculty of Theology in Paris in 1445 condemned the practice, complaining about the braying, the silly songs, and the general carnival atmosphere inside the house of God. Gradually, through pressure from the church hierarchy, the festival was suppressed and eventually disappeared. Why should we remember a tradition like this? Because it reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously, even in our most solemn moments. It celebrates the role of the humble and the absurd in our lives. We could revive its spirit by finding ways to incorporate humor and playfulness into our own traditions. Maybe it's a silly sweater day or a party where the theme is deliberately ridiculous. It's about remembering that laughter can be a form of worship too. It's a tribute to the donkeys, in our lives, the reliable, hardworking people and things we often take for granted. But there are things we'll never know. Was a specific donkey chosen for the honor each year? Did it have to have certain qualities? What did the priest do if the donkey misbehaved during the service, which it surely must have done sometimes? Outside of France, were there similar festivals celebrating other animals that played a role in the Christmas story, like the ox or the sheep? And what was the most scandalous thing that ever happened during a Feast of the Ass celebration that caused the church to finally crack down on it? Number 6, could your first visitor of the year decide your fate? The clock strikes midnight on December 31st. The new year has begun. You wait by your door, listening. You hope the first person to cross your threshold is a tall, dark-haired man. If he is, your household will have good luck for the next 12 months. But if the first person to enter is a woman, or a man with fair or red hair, you're in for a year of bad fortune. This is the superstition of the first footer. This tradition was, and still is, most strongly associated with Scotland and the north of England. It's a very old belief, likely dating back to a time when a stranger at the door could mean life or death. The first footer is the first person to enter a home after midnight on New Year's Day. The characteristics of this person were believed to set the tone for the entire year. The ideal first footer was a tall, dark-haired man. This preference is often thought to date back to the Viking invasions. A strange man with fair or red hair showing up at your door in the middle of the night was probably a Viking, and that meant trouble. A dark-haired man, on the other hand, was more likely a fellow Celt or Pict, and therefore not a threat. The first footer was also supposed to bring symbolic gifts, each representing a wish for the household. The most common gifts were a lump of coal to wish for warmth, a piece of bread for food, a coin for wealth, salt for health, and a drink of whiskey for good cheer. The first footer was not supposed to speak until they had wished everyone in the house a happy new year. They would enter, place their gifts on the table, and then be offered a drink by the head of the house. In many communities, it was a great honor to be chosen as the first footer for a neighbor's home. Often, a person who fit the lucky description would be prearranged to be the first one to visit a number of houses on the street right after midnight. This tradition emphasizes the importance of community and the connection between households. Your luck for the year wasn't just your own business, it was influenced by your neighbors. It was a ritual that physically brought the community together at the very start of the year. The historian Dr. Marina Warner has written extensively on how superstitions and rituals like this create a sense of control and narrative in people's lives. Believing that you could influence your luck by ensuring the right person walked through your door was a powerful comfort in a world full of uncertainty. The tradition still exists in Scotland as part of their Hogmanay New Year celebrations, but it's less common elsewhere. In our modern, more isolated lives, the idea of a neighbor being the first person to enter our home in the new year seems unlikely. More often, it's just a family member who went outside to see the fireworks. Reviving the spirit of first footing is about actively welcoming the new year with an act of community. You could make a plan to visit a neighbor right after midnight, bringing a small symbolic gift. It doesn't have to be a tall, dark-haired man. The point is the gesture to be the first person to wish someone well in the new year, face to face. It's an intentional act of starting the year by strengthening social bonds. But there are questions about its origins. Is the dark-haired man theory about the Vikings really true, or is it a more modern invention to explain an older belief? What happened in a household where the only person available to be the first footer was a bad luck blonde woman? Were there counter rituals they could perform to undo the curse? Did first footers have a specific route they took through the village, and was there a hierarchy of which houses were most important to visit first? Number 5. Why did people deck the halls with warring plants? So we sing about it every year. Deck the halls with boughs of holly. Holly is the quintessential Christmas plant. But in the Middle Ages, holly wasn't alone. It was always paired with its rival, ivy. And the two plants represented a symbolic battle between the sexes that played out all winter long. Holly and ivy were the two most important plants for winter decoration, long before the Christmas tree became popular. They were brought into the house during the darkest part of the year because they were evergreens. In a world where all the other trees looked dead, holly and ivy were symbols of eternal life and the promise that spring would return. This is a very ancient pre-Christian idea. The Druids, for example, believed that holly's prickly leaves repelled evil spirits. But in medieval folk tradition, the plants took on a new layer of meaning. Holly, with its tough, prickly leaves and strong wood, was seen as a male symbol. Ivy, which is a clinging, winding vine, was seen as a female symbol. Bringing them into the house together was a representation of the partnership between man and woman. But it was also a friendly competition. There were numerous folk songs and carols from the 15th and 16th centuries that were structured as a debate between holly and ivy. One famous carol, the Holly and the Ivy, which we still sing, has been softened over the years. But older songs are much more direct about the rivalry. In some songs, the men of the household would sing the verses praising holly, and the women would sing the verses praising ivy. They would argue about which plant was superior. For example, a holy verse might sing about how holly can stand on its own in the forest, while an ivy verse would praise the ivy for its ability to grow anywhere and bring life to old stone walls. This battle of the sexes was a common theme in medieval entertainment. It was a playful way to acknowledge the tensions and dependencies between men and women. The scholar and historian Richard Green, in his collection The Early English Carols, includes several examples of these debate carols. The competition wasn't serious or hateful, it was a game, a form of holiday fun that allowed men and women to tease each other within a structured traditional format. In the end, both plants were needed to decorate the hall, just as both men and women were needed to make a household. The tradition of pairing the two plants and understanding their symbolic rivalry has mostly been lost. We still use holly, but ivy is much less common in Christmas decorations, and we've certainly lost the playful songs and the battle of the sexes they represented. The focus has shifted entirely to the Christmas tree. Bringing this back would be a wonderful way to add another layer of meaning to our decorations. When you bring greenery into your house, think about the symbolism. You could even revive the game. Have the men in the family decorate one side of the room with male symbols and the women the other with female symbols, and have a playful debate about which is better. It's a way to acknowledge and celebrate our differences in a fun, low-stakes way. But there's much we don't know about this tradition. Were there other plants that were part of this symbolic battle? Was there a winner declared at the end of the 12 days of Christmas, and what did they get? Did the specific placement of the holly and ivy in the house have a special meaning? Or, for example, was holly always placed over the door and ivy over the fireplace? And what did a household do if they lived in a region where one of the plants didn't grow? Was there an approved substitute? Number 4, who was the other Santa Claus? When we think of the person who runs the Christmas season, we think of Santa Claus or perhaps the Lord of Misrule. But in many medieval monasteries, there was another figure of authority during the holidays, the Christmas abbot, or sometimes the abbot of unreason. This tradition was similar to the Lord of Misrule, but was specific to the closed world of the monastery. Monasteries were places of strict rules, prayer, and hard work. The Christmas season was one of the few times when these rules were relaxed. To preside over this period of celebration, the monks would elect one of their own number to be the Christmas abbot. This abbot's job was the opposite of a real abbot's. His role was to lead the monks in fun, games, and feasting. The Christmas abbot would be in charge for the period between Christmas and Twelfth Night. During his reign, the normal, sober routine of the monastery was suspended. There was more food, better drink, and less time spent in solemn prayer and more in celebration. We know about this tradition from the records of various monasteries. For example, the account books of the Augustinian Priory of St. Mary of Bicester in England record expenses for the disports of the Christmas abbot in the 15th century. These expenses included payments for players, minstrels, and extra food and wine. This was a necessary release for men living under a very strict regime. It was a recognized and accepted part of the monastic calendar. It allowed for a period of sanctioned misrule before the return to discipline. However, just like the other Feasts of Fools, it sometimes went too far. There are records of church authorities complaining about the behavior of these Christmas abbots and their followers. They were accused of holding mock services, singing lewd songs, and generally behaving in ways that were not fitting for monks. The Council of Basel in 1431 specifically condemned these kinds of elections and festivals within the church. The Christmas abbot is a fascinating figure because he shows that even in the most serious and devout institutions, there was a recognized need for chaos, laughter, and a temporary release from the rules. It shows a side of monastic life that we rarely think about. It wasn't all just silent contemplation. There was also a time for a party, and they appointed a leader specifically for it. This tradition, being tied to monasteries, died out in England with King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s. In other parts of Europe, it faded with the general church reforms that clamped down on folk rituals. Reviving this idea is about creating space for managed chaos in our own institutions. In a workplace, it could mean appointing a chief fun officer for the month of December, whose only job is to organize fun, non-work-related activities. In a family, it could be putting one person in charge of planning all the games and entertainment for the holiday season. It's about officially recognizing that fun and misrule are not just things that happen by accident. They are important enough to be planned and led. But there are many unanswered questions. How was the Christmas abbot elected? Was it a popular vote or was it a monk known for being particularly fun-loving? What were the limits of his power? Could a Christmas abbot order a real abbot to do something embarrassing? We have records of the expenses, but what exactly were the disports and games they played? And what happened to a Christmas abbot who was particularly bad at his job and presided over a boring holiday season? Number 3, why did Plow Monday mean dressing as an old woman? The Christmas season was over. The 12 days of feasting and fun had ended. It was time to get back to work. The first Monday after Twelfth Night was known in England as Plow Monday. It was the traditional start of the agricultural year, the day when farmers would return to the fields to begin the plowing for the spring crops. But it wasn't a quiet or somber return to work. It was one last, strange day of celebration. On Plow Monday, a group of young farm workers called plow jags, or plow bullocks, would drag a plow through the village. The plow was often decorated with ribbons. The men themselves were disguised. Some would blacken their faces with soot. Others would dress in bizarre costumes. The two most important characters in the group were an old woman called the Bessie and a man dressed as the Fool. Both of these roles were played by men. They would pull the plow from house to house, singing, dancing, and performing a simple folk play. In return, they expected to be given money or food. If a household was generous, the plow jags would move on. But if a household refused to donate, they would be punished. The men would use the plow to plow up the ground in front of the refuser's house, a symbolic curse on their land for the coming year. It was a form of festive blackmail. This was the last gasp of the Christmas misrule. It was one final day for the workers to have some power and control before they went back to their hard, monotonous labor. The disguises, the plays, and the collection of money were all elements borrowed from the mumming traditions of Christmas. According to the research of English folklorist George Frampton, the Plow Monday plays were often very similar to the Christmas mummers' plays, featuring a death and a miraculous revival. The character of the Bessie, the man dressed as a woman, is particularly interesting. This kind of cross-dressing was common in folk rituals. The Bessie was often a comic figure who would interact with the crowd and collect the money. This role of a man-woman figure is found in folk traditions all over the world and often has deep roots in ancient fertility rituals. The tradition was strongest in the eastern agricultural counties of England like Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire. It began to fade in the late 19th century as agriculture became more mechanized and the old village-based society started to break down. The idea of threatening to plow up someone's lawn if they didn't give you money didn't fit well with the more civilized Victorian era. We could revive the spirit of Plow Monday as a way to mark the transition from holiday back to work. On the day everyone returns to the office or school after the new year, you could have a special breakfast or a welcome back party. The key is to acknowledge that the transition is a difficult one and to ease into it with one final shared moment of fun. It's about recognizing the importance of the work to come, but not letting go of the festive spirit all at once. But the origins of the characters are still debated. Why was the lead comic figure always an old woman named Bessie? Does she represent a forgotten pagan goddess of the earth? And who was the fool meant to be? Was the act of plowing up a lawn just a prank, or was it believed to be a real curse that could cause crop failure? And how much money did a typical group of plowjags collect on a successful day? Number 2, what was the original kissing bough? Long before the Christmas tree, the centerpiece of the English Christmas celebration was a kissing bough. It was a beautiful, fragrant, and highly symbolic decoration that hung in the main room of the house. And yes, it was the ancestor of our small sprig of mistletoe. A kissing bough was a homemade decoration. It was usually made from 2 hoops of wood or wire. One passed through the other to create a spherical shape. This sphere was then decorated with evergreens, holly, ivy, rosemary, and bay leaves. It was a ball of living green hanging in the house as a symbol of life in the dead of winter. Red apples were often hung from it, a reminder of the harvest and a promise of future fertility. The bottom of the bough was decorated with a special plant mistletoe, and in the very center there were often candles, which would be lit on Christmas Eve. This creation would be hung from the ceiling in the main hall or doorway. It was under this bough that the family would exchange their greetings and signs of peace. The tradition of kissing under the mistletoe comes directly from this. In medieval and Tudor England, anyone standing under the kissing bough could be kissed. It was a place of licensed fun and flirtation during the festive season. The symbolism of the plants was very important. As we've seen, holly and ivy represented the male and female. The apples were a pagan symbol of fertility. Mistletoe was a plant held sacred by the Druids. They believed it had magical healing powers and was a symbol of peace. According to Norse mythology, the god Balder was killed by an arrow made of mistletoe. His mother Frigg wept tears that became the mistletoe's white berries, and she decreed that the plant should from then on be a symbol of love, not death, and that anyone who passed under it should exchange a kiss. Kissing bough was the heart of the home celebration. It was a focal point for the family's hopes for the coming year, life, the evergreens, fertility, the apples, and peace, the mistletoe. The tradition is described in detail in many historical accounts and is mentioned in books like Alison Weir's A Tudor Christmas. So, why did we trade this complex, symbolic decoration for a giant tree? The Christmas tree is a German tradition. It was popularized in England in the mid-19th century by Queen Victoria's German husband, Prince Albert. A picture of the royal family with their decorated Christmas tree was published in 1848, and soon every fashionable home had to have one. The tree, with its focus on presents underneath, replaced the kissing bough with its focus on human interaction and symbolism as the center of the celebration. We traded a symbol of community for a symbol of commerce. Making a kissing bough is a wonderful way to revive a lost tradition. It's a craft project the whole family can do together, and it changes the focus of the room. Instead of everything pointing towards a tree in the corner where the presents are, a kissing bough hangs in the center of the room, a place where people gather and interact. It's a beautiful, natural decoration that brings a deeper level of meaning back into the home. But its earliest form is lost to us. How was the very first kissing bough constructed before people had wire hoops? What was the full extent of the games and rituals that took place beneath it, besides just kissing? Was there a specific time during the 12 days of Christmas when the bough was thought to be at its most powerful? And why was mistletoe, a plant so important to pagan belief, allowed by the church to be part of this central Christmas decoration when so many other traditions were banned? Number one, what if Christmas was optional? Today, Christmas feels inescapable. The music starts in November. The pressure to buy, to celebrate, to feel a certain way is immense. But in the Middle Ages, the 12 days of Christmas were a season of misrule in a deeper sense. It wasn't just about fun and games. It was a time when the normal rules of work and social obligation were suspended. For many people, participation was a choice. The core of the medieval Christmas was not presents or shopping. It was the cessation of work. From Christmas Day until Plough Monday, for most agricultural workers, all labor stopped. This was a radical idea in a society where life was defined by constant, back-breaking work. As the historian Chris Durston notes in his book The Rights of Descent, this extended holiday was one of the most cherished aspects of the year for the common person. It was a time for rest, for community, and for celebration. The celebrations themselves were largely public and participatory. They happened in the Great Hall of the Manor, in the church, and in the streets. People went mumming. They chose a Lord of Misrule, they went wassailing. These were not activities you consumed passively, like watching a Christmas special on TV. They were things you did with your neighbors, but you could also choose not to. If you wanted a quiet holiday, you could simply stay home. The pressure was not on individual families to create a perfect Christmas in their own home. The celebration was a public utility, available to all who wanted to join in. There was no single, correct way to celebrate. Traditions varied hugely from one region to the next, and even from one village to the next. There was no Santa Claus in the modern sense, no centralized myth maker dictating what the holiday should look like. Christmas was a sprawling, chaotic, and highly localized collection of folk traditions, religious observances, and pagan survivals. It was messy, it was alive, it was optional. This all began to change in the 17th century with the rise of the Puritans. They saw the whole messy business as pagan and sinful. In 1647, the English Parliament, led by Oliver Cromwell, officially banned the celebration of Christmas. For over a decade, it was illegal to hold a Christmas church service or to feast. People were expected to work as normal on December 25th. This attempt to abolish the holiday created a backlash, and when the monarchy was restored in 1660, the celebration of Christmas came back. But it came back changed, and in the 19th century, it was completely reinvented by the Victorians. They domesticated it, they moved the celebration from the public square into the private home. They created a new set of traditions, the tree, the cards, the family dinner, Santa Claus, that were all centered on the nuclear family and the giving of gifts. They made it a holiday about consumption and domestic perfection. They created the Christmas we know today with all of its pressures and expectations. The most radical tradition we could revive from the Middle Ages is the idea of Christmas as a voluntary public festival. It means letting go of the pressure to create a perfect Instagram-worthy holiday in our own homes. It means focusing on rest and community instead of on spending and stress. It means remembering that the core of the holiday is the simple cessation of work. It means creating public celebrations that anyone can join if they feel like it, and feeling no guilt if they don't. It's about giving ourselves and others the freedom to celebrate in a way that is meaningful to us, or not to celebrate at all. But as we look back, the biggest questions remain. In a society with such rigid social structures, how real was the freedom of the Christmas season? Was it just a carefully managed illusion to keep people content? How many people chose to ignore the public chaos and simply enjoy the quiet time off? And the most important question of all, if we stripped away all the modern commercialism and the Victorian inventions, what would be left of our Christmas? Would we even recognize it?